Welcome to one of the most unsettling incidents in the history of American logging. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. We would like to know the extent of these recorded accounts and the time of day or night. The far forests of northern Wisconsin, where the Black River flows through thick pine wilderness, are the setting for the events we're going to examine. Records from the Chippewa County Historical Society show that on the 17th of March, 1891, 19 men set out to cross the flooded river. Only 6 came back 6 hours later. What transpired during those hours would leave a stain on the small town of Weyerhaeuser that some claim still exists today, as well as permanently plague the area's timber business. The upper Midwest saw a very severe winter in 1891. Temperatures dropped to previously unheard-of lows. For weeks at a time, the Wisconsin State Journal reported negative 40 degrees. By late January, the unrelenting snowfall had accumulated to almost 6 feet in some places. These circumstances offered both opportunity and risk to the local logging enterprises. Although moving huge logs was made simpler by the frozen ground, workers were pushed to their limits by the remoteness and extreme cold. In late 1889, the Holberg Timber Company built Camp 27, some 17 miles northwest of Weyerhaeuser. The camp was made up of 3 main buildings: a mess hall, a lengthy bunkhouse, and a modest foreman's office. In the winter of 1891, 37 soldiers were accommodated at Camp 27, according to company records held in the archives of the Wisconsin Historical Society. The majority were immigrants, including Germans, Swedes, Norwegians, and some Irish. They came in search of the comparatively high pay that the hazardous labor offered, money that they could either use to buy their own land or send home to their families. Augustus Holberg, the foreman, was the business owner's younger brother. He was over 6 feet tall, with a thick beard that partially covered a scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline, and according to county records, he was a serious man of stern constitution. According to former workers interviewed during a 1937 WPA oral history study, Augustus required complete obedience from his subordinates and hardly ever smiled. Emil Gustafson, a former logger, said, "The men feared Holberg more than they feared the saws or the winter. The fact that everything appeared normal in the days preceding the disaster is what made the Camp 27 affair so unsettling." The camp ledger, which is being kept at the Marathon County Historical Museum, contains standard entries such as supply inventories, production targets, and minor injuries that were attended to. There is no history of disagreements or disciplinary issues, nor is there any sign of exceptional tension between the males. On the 16th of March, 1891, the final entry only states, "Clear weather, 26 degrees, river rising with spring thaw. Cutting to conclude at Northridge tomorrow." Augustus himself chose the 19 men who left camp at morning on March 17. Holberg came through the bunkhouse before first light, pointing to men as they lay in their bunks. You, not you. You. No explanation of who was selected or why is provided in the only letter that survives, written on the 25th of March 1891, from logger Franz Mueller to his wife in Milwaukee. In addition, Mueller writes in a letter that is currently housed in the archives of the Wisconsin Historical Society, "I was not selected, which at first seemed like good fortune. Now I wonder if I wouldn't have preferred to know what happened on the other side." About 4 miles across the Black River, the 19-man crew was said to have arrived in an unspoiled stand of old-growth white pine. According to company documents, this timber was bought the previous fall, but was not harvested because of access issues to the far-off area. It was urgent to remove this important timber before the spring thaw rendered the job impossible, as spring was quickly approaching and the logging season was coming to an end. The Chippewa Herald newspaper, published the 22nd of March 1891, provides the most thorough modern description of what happened. The story, which was titled "Tragedy Befalls Logging Camp," stated, 6 men emerged from the forest Wednesday evening in a state of extreme distress, claiming 13 of their companions perished while crossing the Black River earlier that day. The survivors, all in poor condition and speaking incoherently, were brought to Dr. Anderson's office in Weyerhaeuser. Authorities have dispatched a search party to locate the missing men, though rising waters make the effort perilous. Olaf Lindstrom, Jeremiah Collins, Carl Schaefer, Peter Anderson, Mikhail Baronov, and Augustus Holberg himself were the 6 survivors who would give differing versions of what transpired that day. The mystery surrounding the fate of their 13 colleagues would only be further complicated by their conflicting testimony, which were retained in the sheriff's inquiry report. The men allegedly tried to cross the river on a makeshift raft of lashed logs, according to Swedish immigrant Olaf Lindstrom, 34. According to his statement, which Sheriff James Patterson recorded, the raft fell apart halfway across despite the hazardous spring circumstances. When questioned how he escaped, Lindstrom reportedly glanced at the wall and mumbled, "I swam. I just swam." However, the medical examiner's findings immediately called into question this version. Men were thrown into the freezing water. The current was too strong. "I heard screaming, then nothing." In response to these contradictions, Lindstrom reportedly became agitated and insisted, "I swam through it, not in it, through it. Doctor." Thomas Anderson wrote, "Subject shows no signs of immersion. Clothing is dirty but dry. No evidence of hypothermia or exposure to cold water. Physical condition inconsistent with claimed river crossing." Irish logger Jeremiah Collins, who had been employed by Holberg Timber for 3 years, had a completely different story. Collins said, "We never reached the river. There was something in the woods, something that called to us with familiar voices. Jensen went first, then Muller. They walked into the mist and didn't return." Sheriff Patterson reported that Collins grew more and more upset during his interview, eventually curling into a fetal position and covering his ears as if he were hearing something intolerable. Dr. William Gorman, Collins' attending physician, recorded his quick decline when he was moved to the Northern Wisconsin Hospital for the Insane in Winnebago. According to hospital records, Collins refused to sleep, saying, "They come for you in the dark. Their fingers tap on the windows. They have too many fingers." He passed away 4 months later from what the hospital describes as acute melancholia with catatonic features, though Dr. Gorman's private correspondence, which was discovered in 1967, raises the possibility that Collins may have fatally starved himself. The probe took on even more unsettling aspects after Carl Schaefer's testimony. Schaefer, a German immigrant who had joined Camp 27 just 2 months prior, was discovered with significant lacerations on his hands and forearms, which he refused to disclose. During his interview, Schaefer recorded that he said in a flat, emotionless tone, "Holberg knew. He always knew. That's why he chose who would go. He needed 13 of us for them." Betrayed. When asked to clarify, Schaefer allegedly started scratching at the wooden table with his fingernails until they bled, repeating, "The trees were not trees." Dr. Anderson's medical report states that Schaefer's self-inflicted wounds, which formed a distinctive pattern, subject has carved what appear to be crude representations of trees into his own flesh, extending from wrist to elbow on both arms. When asked about these injuries, the subject says, "I needed to know what was inside." At first, Peter Anderson's testimony appeared to support Lindstrom's story of a botched river crossing. Sheriff Patterson did point out a few contradictions in his testimony, though. Although Anderson stated that he was in the back of the raft when it broke apart, he was unable to elaborate on the raft's construction or the number of guys on board. He mentioned a number of guys who had not been on the mission at all when asked which of his friends had perished. Anderson's assertion that the incident had happened at sunset, even though corporate records and other witnesses placed the effort to cross the river in the early morning, was the most odd. According to reports, Anderson got perplexed when this disparity was brought up, saying, "It was morning when we left, but the sky turned red as we approached the river. Not like sunrise, like sunset, like the day was ending instead of beginning." Initially, the most logical explanation came from Mikhail Baronov, a Russian immigrant who had previously worked in his native country's forestry business. Using methods common to river loggers, he explained, the group had built a raft by tying 15 pine logs together with rope and making a primitive steering system. He said that around halfway across the swollen river, the raft started to disintegrate, flinging guys into the icy torrent. According to Baranov, he managed to reach the far shore by clinging to a piece of the raft. I saw Holberg, Lindstrom, and Schaefer reach land as well, but no one else, he said. He seemed briefly perplexed when questioned about Collins and Anderson, before stating that they must have crossed at a separate time. Sheriff Patterson observed that Baranov's account seemed the most credible since he spoke candidly and kept constant eye contact throughout the interrogation. But Baranov's credibility was further damaged by Dr. Anderson's medical examination. Despite the wounds appearing to be recent, the subject denied knowledge of them when questioned. The doctor wrote, "Subject, like others, shows no evidence of immersion in cold water or exposure to elements consistent with his story. Furthermore, subject has unusual markings on palms of both hands, perfectly circular burns approximately 1 inch in diameter." Above all, the expedition commander and company foreman, Augustus Holberg, declined to make a comment. According to Sheriff Patterson's reports, subject sits in silence, staring at the wall. Responds to no questions. Appears physically unharmed but completely withdrawn. Eyes track movement, but he gives no indication he hears or understands speech directed at him. According to Dr. Anderson, subject in state of catatonic withdrawal. Physically healthy but mentally absent. Pupils react normally to light. Reflexes intact. No evidence of head trauma or other physical injury that might explain his condition. Curious observation. Subject's pockets contained approximately 24 white pine needles, meticulously arranged in patterns and bound with thread. The 13 guys who went missing were not located by the search team that left on March 23. According to Sheriff Patterson's report, we followed the trail to the river's edge. The water is high, but not impassable. We found no evidence of a raft, broken or otherwise, no personal effects, no tools, no signs of struggle. It is as if 13 men simply vanished from the earth. The report goes on to say, "We crossed the river to search the opposite bank. Located area of white pine mentioned in company records approximately 4 miles inland. Trees undisturbed. No evidence of logging activity. No footprints or signs of human presence, despite relatively dry ground that should have preserved tracks." In the sheriff's report, one particular aspect jumps out as being especially odd. Deputy Michael Collins, who is not related to Jeremiah Collins, area surrounding the White Pine Stand unusually quiet. No birds, no small game, though tracks indicate abundant wildlife in adjacent forest. Men reluctant to enter the stand itself. Dogs refuse to approach, becoming agitated and aggressive when urged forward. Search concluded at perimeter due to rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. When Augustus Holberg was discovered dead in his Weyerhaeuser hotel room on the 25th of March 1891, the case became even more complicated. Although self-termination by hanging was stated as the cause in the coroner's report, investigators were concerned about a number of irregularities. The body was discovered hanging from a ceiling beam that, according to structural evaluations, should not have been able to hold a man Holberg's stature. According to the report, Holberg's hands were discovered, clenched hard, and his fingernails were so deeply entrenched in his palms that they were drawing blood. The most upsetting was the discovery of a journal in Holberg's possession, filled with what Sheriff Patterson called disturbing illustrations and unintelligible writing. The journal, which was photographed for the case file but was later lost when the Chippewa County Courthouse burned in 1903, reportedly featured drawings of distorted human figures with elongated limbs and features that one deputy described as more tree than man. Witnesses who looked at the journal reported that the same phrase was written repeatedly in what appeared to be different handwriting styles. The forest claims its own. The final page, according to Sheriff Patterson's notes, featured a map of what appeared to be the Camp 27 area, with 13 X marks arranged in a perfect circle around the White Pine Stand on the far side of the river. The other 5 survivors scattered within a week of Holberg's passing. On the 28th of March 1891, Olaf Lindstrom is said to have taken a train to Minneapolis. Although his ticket purchase is confirmed by railroad records, there is no proof that he actually reached his destination. A station master was concerned about an unclaimed piece of luggage belonging to a traveler named Lindstrom who never claimed his bags, according to a Minneapolis Police Department complaint dated April 4, 1891. Only clothes and a little cloth pouch full of pine needles were in the suitcase. On the 2nd of April 1891, Carl Schaefer attempted to burn down a boarding house in Eau Claire and was admitted to the Northern Wisconsin Hospital. The commitment papers state that Schaefer was discovered in the establishment's basement, surrounded by piles of kindling and muttering, "Fire is the only thing they fear. Fire is how we keep them back." According to hospital records, Schaefer was assigned to the same ward as Jeremiah Collins, although staff observed that despite their shared experience, the men never acknowledged one another's presence. There are a number of alarming items in Schaefer's hospital file. An attendant claimed to have discovered Schaefer standing still by his window for more than 6 hours on the 17th of April, 1891, gazing out at the tree line beyond the hospital. The patient was found on May 3 trying to use his fingernails, which had been permitted to grow in contravention of hospital policy, to scratch through the wooden floor of his chamber. Most famously, on May 29, a night watchman claimed to have overheard Schaefer conversing with an invisible person and asking, "How many more do you need?" repeatedly. On the 30th of March, 1891, Peter Anderson and Mikhail Baranov reportedly left Weyerhaeuser together, informing their landlady that they would be returning to Camp 27 to retrieve their wages and possessions. That afternoon, about 5 miles outside town, a lumberman named Thomas Gunderson said he saw the two guys on the logging road. In his statement to the sheriff, Gunderson said both males looked anxious and kept checking their shoulders. Neither man was ever seen in Weyerhaeuser again, but Gunderson remembered Baranov saying something strange as they left. "If we are not back by nightfall, we were never meant to return." On April 3, Sheriff Patterson formed a second search party, but they were unable to locate the men at the abandoned camp or along the road. The cook burner in the mess hall was warm to the touch, indicating recent use despite Camp 27 having been empty for more than 2 weeks, according to the expedition's disturbing report. There was no additional indication of visitation. On the 10th of April, 1891, the investigation was officially closed, and Sheriff Patterson's final report stated, "In the absence of bodies or witnesses willing or able to provide a coherent account, this office can only conclude that the 13 missing men perished during a river crossing gone wrong." Survivors' conflicting statements are explained by the trauma of seeing their friends die and the harsh conditions they had faced in the forest before arriving in town. Patterson did, however, have private concerns about his official finding, according to a 1952 discovery of a personal letter he wrote to the Chippewa County District Attorney. "The contradictions cannot be reconciled," Patterson stated in the letter. "I have filed my report as expected, but between us, Hawkins, I am deeply troubled by this case. In 23 years of law enforcement, I have never encountered anything like it. The physical evidence contradicts all testimony, and I cannot shake the feeling that something truly horrific occurred in those woods, something beyond ordinary understanding." After the incident, Camp 27 was permanently shuttered by the Holberg Timber Company. The prized white pine stand across the river was never harvested, according to company ledgers. Owner Heinrich Holberg ordered the camp to be abandoned with all equipment left in place, according to a note in the company's financial records dated the 15th of April, 1891. This was an uncommon choice considering the tools and supplies' significant value. After the March 1891 incident, the company itself dissolved 2 years later, with financial records showing a sharp drop in output. The tragedy was hardly more than a footnote in local history for decades, sporadically brought up in county historical publications or newspaper retrospectives. When Harold Meyer, a WPA employee, started interviewing senior citizens in Chippewa County in 1937, this was altered. His interviews, which have been archived in the American Life Histories collection of the Library of Congress, demonstrated that a sophisticated local mythology had grown up around Camp 27. These reports state that local loggers would not operate within 5 miles of the former campground. Despite having good timber, The area was purposefully avoided during later logging operations, according to maps from the early 1900s. Particularly in the late winter, locals reported hearing phantom axe strikes in the forest at night. Notably, a number of respondents separately brought up the folklore that 13 trees in the forest trees that supposedly bleed when cut contain the spirits of the missing loggers. One of the people Meyer interviewed, Jacob Lindgren, was a cook at another logging camp in 1897. According to Lindgren, there was a French-Canadian logger named Bouchard who claimed he got lost hunting and ended up near the old Holberg camp. Said he found the bunkhouse still standing, looking like the men had just stepped out. Said he saw movement inside, but when he opened the door, found only 13 pairs of boots arranged in a circle in the center of the room. He left the area immediately and quit logging altogether the next day. Margaret Wilson, who ran a boarding house in Weyerhaeuser from 1894 to 1920, provided another account. Wilson stated to Meyer, "We had an unspoken rule never to rent rooms to men who came from the direction of the old Camp 27. There were stories of strangers who arrived in town speaking gibberish, their clothes smelling of pine sap despite the season. They never stayed more than one night and always left before dawn. Plants in rooms they occupied would be found dead the next morning." The testimony of William Hayes, a former sheriff's deputy who had taken part in the initial search for the missing loggers in 1891, was possibly the most unsettling. Hayes was 82 years old and experiencing what his family described as more regular bewilderment at the time of Meyer's 1937 interview. His memory of the quest, however, was still clear. Hayes told Meyer, "We found something out there that never made it into the official report. About a mile past the river, in the direction of the White Pine Stand, we came across a clearing that wasn't natural. Perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, with the ground bare despite the surrounding snow cover. In the center was a pile of empty clothing, exactly 13 sets of work clothes laid out as if the men wearing them had simply vanished from inside them. Sheriff Patterson ordered us to tell no one what we'd found. We left everything untouched and marked the location on no map." When asked why this discovery wasn't included in the official report, Hayes reportedly lowered his voice to a whisper, despite being alone with Meyer. "Because 3 days later we went back with more men to collect the evidence, and everything was gone. The clearing, the clothes, even the distinctive trees we had marked to find our way back, all gone. Instead, we found 13 saplings planted in a perfect circle, saplings that couldn't possibly have grown to that size in 3 days." Dr. Eleanor Katz, an anthropologist at the University of Wisconsin, studied logging-related folklore in 1952. Elizabeth Miller, daughter of Franz Miller, who was at Camp 27 but was not one of the 19 chosen to cross the river, is interviewed in her unpublished manuscript, "Narratives of Fear in Wisconsin Logging Communities." According to the transcript, Elizabeth said, "Father never spoke of what happened, but he would not allow lumber in our house. Our home was built of brick, our furniture of metal. When I asked why, he would say, 'Some trees remember what they've seen.'" Ida Schaefer, Carl Schaefer's niece, who frequently visited her uncle at the Northern Wisconsin Hospital until his death in 1893, is featured in Katz's manuscript as another noteworthy interview. She recalled, "Uncle Carl spent hours drawing the same image over and over, a circle of trees with faces in their trunks. He told me once, very clearly, during a rare lucid moment, they made a bargain, you see. 13 men for 13 trees, but the forest is greedy. It will want more, eventually." Historian Thomas Blackwood's 1968 attempt to pinpoint the exact location of Camp 27 and the scene of the purported tragedy was the most extensive inquiry. After finding Sheriff Patterson's private letters in the county records, Blackwood, a professor of logging industry history at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, developed an interest in the Camp 27 event. Blackwood put together a study team that included himself, photographer Daniel Morrison, doctoral student Rebecca Chen, and local guide Samuel White Feather, whose grandfather had been a logger in the area in the early 1900s. Blackwood's field notes, photographs, and audio recordings, which are all kept at the University of Wisconsin archives, provided a comprehensive record of their expedition. In order to find the location of Camp 27, the team left Weyerhaeuser on the 15th of March 1968, using old maps and logging business documents. According to Blackwood's notes for March 16, have located what appears to be Camp 27 foundations, approximately 17 miles northwest of Weyerhaeuser. 3 structures arranged as described in company records: long rectangular foundation, likely bunkhouse; smaller square foundation, probable mess hall; and small rectangular foundation, foreman's office. Sam Whitefeather notes the unusual lack of forest reclamation. Foundations clearly visible despite 77 years of abandonment. Photographs taken during this leg of the journey reveal moss-covered crumbling stone foundations that are astonishingly intact for having been exposed to Wisconsin's severe winters for decades. A set of pictures that seem to depict the remains of the camp's well are especially intriguing. A circular stone construction about 4 feet in diameter is depicted in Morrison's images. Even with the strong flash, darkness hides its depth. Blackwood and Whitefeather are heard talking about the well in a recording from that night. Blackwood said, "Strange that the well hasn't filled in after all this time." The Whitefeather, "Maybe it has. Maybe what you're seeing isn't the bottom." "What do you mean?" asked Blackwood. The Whitefeather, "My grandfather told me the Holberg camp well had no bottom. That's why the loggers avoided it. One man lost a watch down it. Said they lowered a lantern on 200 feet of rope and never saw it hit water." With a laugh, Blackwood says, "Well, every camp has its stories." The Whitefeather, "This isn't a story. My grandfather wouldn't drink from that well. None of the Indian loggers would. They said it tasted like something was already drinking from the other side." The next day, the group proceeded to the crossing place of the Black River. "Have reached the river. Peculiar atmosphere here. Dead quiet. No birds, no insects. Team on edge. Compasses spinning. Will camp overnight and cross tomorrow." Blackwood's notes from the 17th of March, 1968, approximately 77 years after the disappearance, include the unsettling entry: "Have reached the river. Peculiar atmosphere here. Dead quiet." An audio recording from that evening captures an eerie ambient silence, broken only by the crackling of the team's campfire. Around 27 minutes into the clip, a sequence of rhythmic sounds can be heard in the background. These are constant impacts that have been recognized by multiple audio analysts as being similar to the sound of axe strikes on wood. The following exchange is captured on the recording. Chen replied, "Is someone out there?" "Sounds like chopping," Morrison said. "At this hour? In this location?" asked Blackwood. "We should leave now," said Whitefeather. Blackwood, "Sam, there's probably a logical explanation." Whitefeather, "Yes, there is. And that's why we should leave." The chopping sounds progressively get louder and faster during the next 3 minutes of the recording. Whitefeather is heard speaking in what linguists have determined to be Ojibwe in the last 30 seconds, seemingly addressing an object or person that is out of view of the camera. The recording cuts off in the middle of a statement. This is the last piece of evidence from the Blackwood expedition that has been recorded. When Blackwood and his group failed to return to Weyerhaeuser 3 days later, they were listed as missing by the police. Their abandoned camp was found on the near side of the Black River during a later search and rescue operation. Everything was in its proper position, including priceless cameras and recording equipment. No struggle or distress was evident. Under the direction of Robert Lakeland, an officer with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the search was conducted within 5 miles of the encampment. No tracks leading away from camp despite soft ground that should have preserved footprints. River conditions mild. Crossing would have been easily possible. No evidence of accident or violence. 4 adult individuals appear to have vanished without trace. The 4 researchers had reportedly vanished without explanation, just like the loggers 77 years prior, according to Lakeland's report. After 2 weeks, authorities decided the team had probably tried to cross the river and drowned, so they called off the search. Their remains were never found. 5 months later, an intriguing postscript to the Blackwood disappearance surfaced. About 10 miles downstream from the alleged river crossing spot, a hiker named Martin Collins found a camera on the 23rd of August 1968. Police developed the film and discovered that it included 23 exposures from the Blackwood excursion. Of these, 22 matched photos that were already in the team's Camp 27 record. However, the last image appeared to be the white pine stand on the far side of the river, which was thought to be the location of Blackwood's study team and the first logging trip. Despite its lack of focus, the picture makes out a circle made up of very enormous white pine trees. A black object that analysts have classified as a stump, a hole in the ground, or a standing figure appears in the center of the circle. The handwritten note that was discovered with the camera, written on a page that appeared to have been torn from Blackwood's field journal, is the most unsettling. There are just 5 words on the note, which has been verified to be written by Blackwood. They are not trees. Run. In 1969, the U.S. Forest Service acquired the property where Camp 27 had been located and added it to the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. Unofficial conversations with Forest Service personnel reveal a more alarming policy. Forest Service maps mark the area with the notation, Ecological Research Zone, no timber harvesting permitted. When contacted for this documentary, Forest Service officials would only say that the designation was made due to unique biological characteristics of the old-growth forest in that sector. An anonymous ranger said, "We're under strict instructions to avoid that section of the forest, especially after dark. Maintenance is minimal. Trails are deliberately left unmarked, and any reports of strange occurrences in the area are routed directly to the regional supervisor rather than being logged in the normal system." Dr. James Winters, a botanist at the University of Wisconsin, noticed odd patterns in aerial photos and tried to explore the restricted area in 1974. Records from the university show that Winters requested a special research authorization but was turned down without providing a reason. Winters and 2 graduate students moved forward without permission. After not checking in for 3 days in a row, the group was reported missing. Their car was found parked along an unmarked forest access road following a search. Winters' voice recorder, with 1 short recording, found in the car. The recording ends abruptly with what sound analysts have described as a low rumbling noise followed by multiple impacts. Winters is heard saying, "March 19th, 6:42 p.m., we found the circle. The trees are exactly as described in the Blackwood materials. Massive white pines, at least 300 years old, arranged in a perfect circle, approximately 30 meters in diameter. Jonas is taking samples. Ellen is photographing. The bark texture is strange, as it appears to have irregular patterns that almost resemble." 5 days later, the 3 researchers were finally located, miles from their planned research site, roaming independently along various woodland paths. All 3 resigned their jobs at the university within 6 months of the incident, and medical reports show they suffered from severe dehydration, exposure, and what doctors called a acute stress reaction. None of them had any recollection of what happened after they entered the forest. This story has an interesting backstory. In 1963, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources mapped the distribution of different tree species in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest through an aerial survey. In the area of what was once Camp 27, the survey photos, which are kept at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, reveal an odd pattern, a perfect circle of white pine trees that is about a mile in diameter. The documentary's forestry experts were unable to provide a natural explanation for this creation. In March 1891, what actually happened to those 13 loggers? When compared to the evidence, the official explanation, a botched river crossing, becomes more and more unlikely. Many searches were conducted, but no bodies were ever found. The testimonies of the survivors were inconsistent and, in several situations, defied logical interpretation. Another group of persons disappeared in the same spot 77 years later, and the site became the focus of enduring local tales. The fate of Mikhail Baranov, the 6th survivor, is arguably the most telling. According to city directory records, Baranov reappeared in Minneapolis in 1893 after going missing from Weyerhaeuser in 1891. For almost 20 years he lived there in obscurity, working as a handyman and laborer. A brief item in the Minneapolis Tribune on the 12th of December, 1912, claims that Baranoff lived out his last years as a maintenance guy at a nearby furniture business and at a boarding home in Minneapolis, where he spoke to no one. According to the article Local Man's Strange Passing, Baranoff's landlady found that his room's walls were covered in 19 tiny carved wooden images after his death. 13 of these figures were faceless. 6 featured faces that were painstakingly detailed. Baranoff had carved his own image with its eyes closed, and Augustus Holberg's with a rope around its neck, according to the report. The landlady's description of the apartment itself was the most unsettling. A material that looked like tree sap was spread across the walls in patterns that resembled text in a language I don't understand. The boards of the floor had been pried up in the center of the room, revealing a cavity filled with pine needles. Beneath the needles was a bound journal, which upon inspection appeared to be written in Mr. Baranoff's hand, but in his native Russian language. After being found in the Minneapolis Historical Society's archives, this journal was finally translated in 1957 by Professor Alexei Komarov of the University of Minnesota. The notebook starts off logically with Baranov narrating what happened at Camp 27, according to Komarov's translation. The testimony he provided to Sheriff Patterson is very different from his version. Baranov stated that Holberg knew what waited across the river. He had made a bargain the previous autumn when he first surveyed the timber stand. 13 trees for 13 men. That was the exchange. But he did not tell us. He selected those of us who would survive and those who would be taken. By mid-morning, the logging crew had safely crossed the river and arrived to the White Pine Stand, according to the journal's increasingly fragmented account. According to Baranoff, what transpired defies logic. The trees stood in a circle, impossibly tall and straight. The men began to prepare their tools, but Holberg ordered us to wait. "Not yet," he said. "It has to be at noon, when the sun is directly overhead." The forest apparently fell silent when the sun rose to its highest point. The 13 men assigned to the deal reportedly started entering the circle one by one, moving as though in a trance, and Baranov recounted a feeling of pressure, like being deep underwater, followed by a sound like wood creaking, but formed into words somehow. Baranov's journal ends with this coherent entry: "I hear them at night, not just the 13 who were taken, but others, many others. They whisper from inside the walls, from inside the wood itself. They tell me the forest has always been hungry. They tell me 13 was not enough. They tell me the trees are spreading, always spreading. And one day, there will be nowhere left to run." The rest of the journal devolves into what Komarov called increasingly abstract and unsettling imagery, with entire pages devoted to repetitive drawings of trees with human features and human figures with limbs resembling branches. One statement, printed in English instead of Russian, appears on the last page. "They are not trees. They have never been trees. The woodland is unusually quiet, according to some who have visited the area around the former Camp 27 site in recent years. Off-the-record interviews with park rangers revealed that animals avoids the region." A ranger who requested anonymity said, "We don't go there at night. Not since '86, when 2 of our guys went missing during a routine patrol. They were experienced outdoorsmen." Their truck was found parked on the old logging road. Inside was a tape recorder, still running. Nothing on the tape but static, and what sounds like axe strikes in the distance. To document the site, the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire planned a centenary expedition in 1991, precisely 100 years after the initial incident. 1 week prior to the project's planned departure, the university canceled it, despite careful planning and safety measures. Budgetary restrictions were given as the official explanation, but according to internal memos retrieved through Freedom of Information requests, administrators were sent an anonymous package with a single pine needle and the words, "The forest remembers." In Weyerhaeuser, a modest museum of logging history is still maintained by local resident Thomas Gunderson, grandson of the lumberman who reported the last sighting of Anderson and Baranov in 1891. A number of objects purportedly related to the Camp 27 incident are on display, including an axe that was apparently discovered at the location in 1927, a piece of petrified wood with its metal head partially embedded in it. Regarding the enduring myths surrounding Camp 27, Gunderson shares a viewpoint that many locals share. Something happened out there that doesn't fit neatly into history books. The official story, men drowning crossing a river, doesn't explain the fear that still keeps people away from that section of forest. It doesn't explain why trees won't grow on the old camp foundations, or why animals avoid the area, or why every few decades, people still go missing in those woods. One particularly unsettling artifact in Gunderson's museum is a jar containing what looks to be pine sap that was taken from the site in 1967. "My father found this," says Gunderson. He said the sap was flowing upward on one of the trees near the old camp, defying gravity. Scientists from the university said it was impossible. But here's the proof. And if you look closely, sometimes you can see it move on its own, even now. The Camp 27 occurrence was covered in detail in the 1992 book Whispering Pines: Unexplained Disappearances in American Forests, written by paranormal researcher Dr. Marion Blackwell. Blackwell's investigation revealed a troubling trend. Since 1891, at least one person had vanished in the area of the former logging camp every 13 years. Usually in March, the disappearances take place on or close to the anniversary of the initial incident. Blackwell painstakingly recorded these disappearances. Frederick Johnson, a game warden, was last observed in 1904 inspecting traps close to the Black River. In 1917, William Stroberg, a local hunter, reportedly informed companions that he was going to finally get a look at those special trees. 1,930. Thomas Green, a field assistant, and Dr. Henry Wilson, a university botanist, 1,943. 3 employees of a War Department timber survey crew. Photographer Elaine Montgomery in 1956, gathering pictures for a Wisconsin folklore book. The 4 participants in Thomas Blackwood's study excursion in 1969. In 1982, it was discovered that hiker James Peterson had written in his journal about trees that don't move like trees should. Sarah Coleman, an environmental campaigner, looked into reports of illicit logging in the restricted area in 1995. 2008, Michael Davis, an amateur historian, trying to pinpoint the exact location of Camp 27. According to Blackwell, the pattern is undeniable. Even if the explanation remains elusive, something in those woods takes people and has been doing so methodically for over a century. In 1997, dendrochronologist Dr. Rebecca Chen, ironically, the same Rebecca Chen who had vanished with Blackwood's expedition in 1968 and was discovered wandering days later, performed a study of tree growth patterns in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, which may have been the most scientific attempt to explain the Camp 27 phenomena. Chen had dedicated her professional life to researching unusual tree forms, either in spite of or possibly as a result of her own experience. Chen took core samples from trees farther and farther away from the restricted area with the Forest Service's special permission and the help of armed rangers. Her results were published in the Journal of Arboretum Studies. Tree rings show a consistent pattern of accelerated growth in years following the documented disappearances, particularly in white pines. This suggests a periodic release of nutrients into the soil, a phenomenon typically observed after forest fires or mass die-offs, neither of which have occurred in this region. In private notes obtained following her passing in 2016, Chen wrote with greater candor, "The trees are feeding. The pattern is unmistakable. Every 13 years they take what they need, and they grow. The Forest Service knows. That's why the area is restricted. They've made the same bargain Holberg made. Sacrifice a few to protect the many. But the circle is widening. I've documented expansion of nearly 2 miles since the first aerial surveys. At the current rate, it will reach Weyerhaeuser within 50 years. In 2021, a previously undiscovered diary was found while renovating a historic house in Eau Claire, marking the latest episode in the Camp 27 tale. Dr. Thomas Anderson, the doctor who examined the 6 survivors in 1891, owned the diary. The diary had been kept secret for over a century, hidden under a brick in the chimney in a chamber. Anderson's private thoughts regarding the Camp 27 incident are included in the diary, which demonstrates his intense dissatisfaction with the official account. He wrote on the 24th of March, 1891, "I cannot reconcile what I observed with what the men claimed. Their physical condition contradicted every aspect of their testimony. Yet I cannot offer a rational alternative. What I can say with certainty is that all 6 men carried the same peculiar odor, not unwashed bodies or river water, but something sickly sweet, like tree sap mixed with decay." Most significantly, Anderson documented his examination of an unusual substance found on Holberg's clothing. The foreman's jacket contained a sticky residue unlike anything I have encountered. Under magnification, it appears to contain both sap-like components and what I can only describe as microscopic fibers that move independently when exposed to heat. I have preserved a sample for further study, though I confess the material unsettles me profoundly. Anderson's final entry regarding Camp 27, dated the 17th of April, 1891, reads, "I visited the site myself today. Driven by a compulsion I cannot explain, I approached from the north, avoiding the river crossing entirely. The camp stands abandoned, yet does not feel empty. I observed the circle of white pines in the distance, but could not bring myself to approach closer. As I turned to leave, I noticed fresh tracks leading from the camp to the river, tracks that appeared human at first glance, but upon closer examination seemed subtly wrong in ways I struggled to articulate. I have resolved never to return and to burn the sample I collected. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve." Intriguingly, the diary indicates Anderson did not burn the sample as intended. Researchers who inspected the Anderson home found no evidence of the sample he described. He wrote, "I found I could not destroy it. When I held it to the flame, I heard, or thought I heard, a sound like distant screaming. The sample now resides in a sealed glass vial in my medical cabinet. May God forgive me, but I cannot relinquish this evidence, horrifying as its implications may be, except in his medical cabinet." They did find a little secret compartment that held nothing except a circle of dried pine needles encircling a hollow in the wood where something had once been placed. Weyerhaeuser has a tense relationship with its troubled past. Some locals, like Thomas Gunderson, want to keep the legends alive, while others would rather not be associated with the Camp 27 narrative. The tragedy isn't included in the local Chamber of Commerce's advertising brochures, which instead highlight the town's history of logging and outdoor leisure. However, the tale endures in local culture. Margaret Wilson, a lifelong resident of Weyerhaeuser and an elementary school teacher, says, "Every child who grows up here learns about Camp 27 eventually. It's our local boogeyman tale. Don't go into the Northwoods, or the trees will get you." Parents discourage the stories, but they spread anyway. And every few years, when someone else goes missing in that part of the forest, the whispers start again. The story of Camp 27 has been examined as an example of occupational folklore by Dr. &R. James Patterson, a folklorist at the University of Minnesota who is unrelated to Sheriff Patterson. "Logging was and is a dangerous job," says Patterson. The Camp 27 story encapsulates the very real perils of the profession: isolation, harsh conditions, the constant threat of death. But it also speaks to a deeper, more primal fear: the forest as an entity with its own awareness and agenda. Many cultures have traditions portraying the natural world as something that can strike back against human encroachment. The Camp 27 legend is a particularly American manifestation of that archetype. But over a century later, the Camp 27 story's regularity and tenacity point to something more than just legend. The physical evidence, such as the circle tree formation, the abandoned camp, and the reported disappearances, defies easy categorization as urban legend. A classified report examining soil samples from the restricted area was released in 2017 by an unnamed Forest Service employee. It mentions abnormally high concentrations of organic compounds typically associated with decomposition, elevated levels of iron consistent with blood content, and, most significantly, anomalous cellular structures not consistent with known plant or animal taxonomy, which are described as exhibiting characteristics of both plant xylem and animal nervous tissue. The report ends by recommending that the restricted zone be extended by an additional 3 miles and that all requests for research in the area be denied indefinitely. The report was issued in 2005. Just the words, scrawled by hand in the margin, "Containment is priority, prevention impossible," at this stage. Today, the area surrounding the former Camp 27 is a curious dichotomy for anybody venturing into the northern Wisconsin woodlands. A bland area of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest is depicted on official maps. It lacks signs, trails, and any indication of historical significance. Signs from the Forest Service mark environmentally sensitive habitat and forbid entry without authorization. However, residents are aware that the region should be avoided, especially as March draws near. Dogs are not tracking game into the sector, according to hunters. The typical noises of woodland life are abruptly replaced by an eerie hush, according to hikers. When flying overhead, pilots report strange air currents and inexplicable instrument oscillations. In the winter of 1891, what actually happened to those 13 loggers? They never drowned while crossing a river, according to the physical evidence. Survivors' statements suggest something much more troubling than a straightforward accident. Rather than being a single historical occurrence, the pattern of disappearances in the decades that have followed suggests a continuous problem. There are numerous secrets in the forest. It would be preferable to leave some alone. The last words from Carl Schaefer's journal, which was found after his death at the Northern Wisconsin Hospital in 1893, are what we leave you with as we wrap out this video. The trees watch us. They have always watched us. We cut them down by the thousands, and they remember every stroke. The author writes the passage in increasingly erratic handwriting. In the oldest parts of the forest, where no man has ever cut, they wait, and sometimes, when the conditions are right, they reach back. Perhaps people who live close to northern Wisconsin's forests should take a time to think. Think closely the next time you hear the wind blowing through the pines. Is it just the wind? Or is there another explanation? Your name is being spoken, drawing you farther into the forest and promising to reveal secrets that only the forest and the missing know. Why were 6 men let to return if 13 men were actually abducted by something in the forest on that day in 1891? This is the question that no investigator has ever been able to adequately address. What was the function of their traumatized testimony? Was their survival a coincidence, a part of a bigger plan, a warning or a message sent back from the wilds, or something else entirely? Using contemporary GPS technology, researcher Michael Thompson set out to identify the site definitively in March 2021, precisely 130 years after the Camp 27 event. Hourly check-ins with colleagues at the University of Wisconsin were part of his carefully organized mission. Thompson brought emergency location beacons, satellite communications technology, and cutting-edge recording equipment. Thompson's last message was sent at 11:17 a.m. The 17th of March 2021. According to the GPS data, he was around 0.5 miles away from where Camp 27 was thought to be. No other messages were received, and his message was brief. Found old logging road, following to campsite. Strange fog rolling in despite clear weather forecast. Will update in 30 minutes. When Thompson failed to show up for his planned check-in that evening, search and rescue efforts got underway. He may have merely intended a day trip rather than an overnight stay because his car was found near the forest access point with his camping equipment and food. Thompson's equipment was discovered in a tiny area following 3 days of intense searching. His GPS unit, satellite phone, camera, and backpack were all neatly grouped in a circle. Numerous shots of typical forest sceneries were captured by the camera, culminating in a sequence of pictures of a far-off clearing with thin vertical structures that looked like trees gathered in a circle. Since a member of the search team leaked the last picture taken by Thompson's camera online, it has become somewhat of a sensation. The picture looks to depict a stand of white pine trees with peculiar bark patterns. However, picture is blurry and underexposed. Patterns with a startling resemblance to human faces when enhanced. The real Michael Thompson was never located. People looking for resources, recreation, seclusion, or answers have been drawn to northern Wisconsin's forests for decades. Most come back unaltered. Some never come back. Furthermore, only a small percentage return, with stories that significantly alter our perception of the natural world and our place in it. There may never be a complete explanation for the Camp 27 incident. Time has passed, evidence has been lost, and all direct witnesses have died, so some parts of the mystery will always be out of grasp. However, the trend persists. The forest asserts its right every 13 years, and the restricted area is still in place. We leave you with the following words as we wrap up this narration. The forest remembers. The trees are patient. And there will always be those who venture too far. The next time you are walking among old trees, pay close attention to the sounds that surround you. These words were carved into a bench near the Weyerhaeuser Public Library and were placed anonymously on the evening of the 17th of March, 1943. The breeze you hear in the branches isn't the only one. It could be something completely else. Your name is being spoken, drawing you farther into the forest and promising to reveal secrets that only the forest and the missing know.